Tim, it's really cool to be able to do one of these chats face to face because I've been stuck in the home office lately, but life before supercars is the topic, and for you, you've got a pretty cool story to tell.
Jesus, it's a long life before supercars. 17 years I lived in the UK. Based myself out of the UK. When you're working in Formula One, you don't really live anywhere. You're on the road so much of the year. But yeah, from '88 till the end of 2004. Lived in the UK and worked in Formula One for most of that time. In fact, I worked at Jordan Grand Prix from the very start to the finish. So started there at the beginning of '91 when we had that beautiful 7-Up car, and I finished at the end of 2004 to come back to Australia to get out of motorsport, which was pretty much the end of Jordan Grand Prix because the Russians moved in about a month later and it became Midland, and then it became Spiker, and then it became Force India, Racing Point, Aston Martin now. Bizarrely, the guy I promoted to replace me as team manager is still the team manager today. In fact, the conversation I had with my mum at the time was, I'm only going to go for 6 months, Mum, I'll be home for Christmas. And this was May '88. And yeah, I came home 17 years later with a wife, 2 kids, having worked in Formula One all that time. But it was one of those things. I knew a guy working over there, Rob Crawford, who obviously a lot of people know as well. We sort of grew up near each other and had the most bizarre phone call. He rang up homesick one day and I said, what you say in those kind of calls? I said, well, if you hear of any jobs going over there, let me know. He rang me back the very next day and said, Docco, Alan Docking, has got a job going. Here, have a chat to him. And my job interview consisted of Docco getting on the phone, who's lived over there for 50 years but has the strongest Australian accent. Docco got on the phone and said, I hear you coming over, old son. See you when you get here. And 4 days later, I had resigned from my job, put my tools in freight, and got on a plane, Garuda Airlines, and flown to the UK, not really knowing what I was in for. And the journey began.
It didn't quite start in Formula One, did it? What was the first steps in? And you got to work on some really cool cars. One car in particular that I've long loved, the Mazda.
Every year, Mazda would, everybody out of the Mazda factory just about would come over, base themselves out of Docco's, and Docco would run their 3 cars at Le Mans 24 Hour. And they would bring a huge contingent, and Docco's responsibility was to provide some additional mechanics, obviously a workshop for them to base themselves out of, and 4 semis. And bizarrely, I got my truck licence a month before I left Australia. So Docco says, well, you can drive one of the trucks to Le Mans. So having never driven a truck for a career, or been to a motor race like Le Mans, there I was, literally 2.5 weeks later, on a Portsmouth-Le Havre ferry, sleeping in a cabin with 3 other truckies, having just driven a right-hand drive truck down there to then depart and head from Le Havre to Le Mans and start my motorsport career. So that was the first race I went to in Europe, and I was spannering on a car at Le Mans 24 Hour, having just driven a truck through France. It was, it all happened pretty quickly, and then away I went. And then in '89, Mazda decided that they would compete in the full World Championship. So they based 1 car out of Docco's, and the other 2 cars only came over for Le Mans. And Frank Adamson and myself were the 2 mechanics on the car, and we prepared the car in the UK and travelled to all of the World Championship races. Then that was the 767 quad rotor Mazda, beautiful car. And the Japanese contingent, same thing, would fly in en masse to wherever we were racing in the world, and that was year 2 of my motorsport. I almost went to work for Eddie Jordan actually at the end of '89. He was trying to get me to work Formula 3000. The factories, basically the rear of his factory butted onto the rear of Docco's factory. Anyway, Docco and Eddie had a big fallout about Eddie trying to poach his staff. So in the end, I decided not to stay with Docco anyway because I wanted to explore a bit more. So I went and worked for Richard Lloyd Porsche. So we ran 962 Porsche in the world and Japanese championships. There was a pink 962 Porsche. Yeah. So that was an interesting year, and yeah, learn a lot more. And then Eddie finally got his way and I went to work for him at the beginning of '91.
There's probably a zillion moments within your time at Jordan that we could talk about, but something pretty special popped up in the early days, a young driver who got a pretty cool opportunity, and you must have worked with him.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the middle of '91, and Bertrand Gachot was our regular driver. I mean, it was De Chesneris and Gachot, and I'm not even quite sure how it happened, but he got into an argument with a London taxi driver and sprayed CS gas into the taxi driver's face. So he got himself locked up. So all of a sudden we were a couple of weeks out from the Belgium Grand Prix without a driver. And I still remember Eddie, he came to the team and basically said, well, we've got a couple of options. We can put Stefan Johansson in the car or some German kid, Michael Schuh something. And Eddie probably doesn't tell a story like this, but I think it came down to Michael Schuh something came with some money, whereas he probably had to pay Stefan Johansson. So he opted for Michael. And we ended up taking him across the road to the Silverstone South Circuit. And it was the Tuesday before the race, and put him in the car. And it's effectively half of the Silverstone Circuit. There's a bit of a cut-through road. And pretty quickly, he lapped half a second faster than we'd ever been around that circuit. And we tested there a lot. That was our go-to place, being obviously only 500 metres from the factory. And Trevor Foster got on the radio, called him in, and tore strips off Michael about going so fast. You know, you've got to respect these things as a Formula One car. But it was pretty clear from the outset that this kid was quick. Obviously, we then went to Spa on the weekend, and everyone knows what happened then. And on the Monday, he was on his way to sign his contract because he hadn't got round to doing that in that very brief space of time before the event. And he stopped at Enstone on the way and signed with Benetton, and we ended up with Roberto Moreno.
I'll skip you forward a few years. 1994 is now the year, and you were working very closely with Rubens Barrichello that year. What was the relationship like with Rubens?
Yeah, I'll have to give you the PG rating version of that. I was running Rubens' car, and I had a very good relationship with Rubens. But really, you know, it was all about Ayrton when he started. There was the master, and I suppose you'd argue Rubens was the apprentice coming in, and he looked up to Ayrton. You know, he looked like a little kid whenever he was seen, talking with Ayrton. But he was great to work with, and I'm still friends with Rubens to today. I suppose I was early in my Formula One career, and he was at the beginning of his Formula One career when we got to know each other, and so we formed a pretty good relationship.
You were obviously working on Rubens' car in '94 when he had that big one at Imola. How bad was that weekend, and how bad was the car?
I mean, that was horrendous that weekend. In fact, Rubens' accident was the biggest of the weekend. The way that thing flew through the air into the tyre wall. It was, as I've never had a weekend like that since ever. I mean, the Bologna Airport on the Sunday night after the race, was full of all the Formula One teams, and literally there's just men crying everywhere. Everyone was just dumbfounded. I was friends with Ratzenberger because he lived in the Silverstone area, so obviously that he died on the Saturday. Then obviously Ayrton's death on the Sunday. There was a policeman killed at the start of the race because Leto stalled, car hit him from behind, wheel flew over the fence, killed a policeman standing in front of the grandstand. One of the Minardi mechanics, a wheel came off a Ferrari, I think it was, and bounced down the pit lane and broke the back of a Minardi mechanic. It was just horrendous. Everything about that weekend was horrendous. And bizarrely, my wife Trudy, it was her first ever weekend working in Formula One. And, I can tell plenty of stories about that. She was talking to Ayrton before the start of the race, but, it was almost her last weekend because she just didn't know what she'd got herself involved in. Imagine not knowing motorsport, not knowing Formula One, didn't even know who Ayrton was when she was talking to him. And then she's at the airport on the Sunday night and there's hundreds of men just bawling their eyes out. She's thinking, what on earth have I got myself involved in? But that was horrific. But, the positive to come out of it was, the sport reacted really quickly. We made changes to the car, within weeks and months. There was some big changes made and a far greater emphasis put on safety from that point on.
Let's switch it to some happier times. In Spa a few years later, the team had a momentous day, didn't it?
Well, yeah, to not only win our first race, but to have a 1-2. that was incredible. And we were always an underdog team. At the peak of our staff, I think we got to 260, but at that point we wouldn't have even had 200 staff, and we're competing against teams with 400, 500, 600, 800. So we're always a minnow of a team, and so to have a win, that was a huge achievement for the team. So yeah, it was pretty special.
You must have plenty of stories, I imagine, after working for a guy like Eddie Jordan for as long as you did. Probably most can't be told right here, right now, but is there any time that you got to pull a practical joke over him, or any amazing moments that stick with you?
I mean, he was a lunatic. What you see on camera is only the half of it. He is a fair income lunatic. Every single sentence, every second word is F, this, F, F, F. But you know what? The Irish get away with it. It didn't matter who he was talking to. He could be talking to the Queen and he would just drop it. It would be just successive F-bombs, because that was just the way he spoke. He was a ripper of a bloke, and that's why I ended up working there for my whole Formula One career. I had opportunities to go to other teams, but I enjoyed working for Eddie. He was just a fantastic bloke, real character, played the drums. We used to have... he had a very close relationship with people in the music industry, so we had Chris Rea came and rehearsed for his European tour in our factory for 2 weeks, and then we're trying to build cars, and we've got a rock concert going at the end of the factory, and then at the end of it he put on a concert for all the staff and families, and Eddie put on the bar, and so real character. And even you meet a lot of famous people in Formula One, but the one that stuck with me was I was standing on the pit wall with Eddie, no idea what we were talking about, at Monaco, and next thing this bloke squeezes in between the two of us, and I'm thinking, rude bastard, and it was Bono. So I quickly forgave him for being a rude bastard, because he just wanted to get involved in the conversation, and I'm like, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Is there anything that Eddie Jordan taught you about being a boss that has stuck with you in your time now in supercars?
I've never really thought about it, but probably yes. I mean, I'm not a micromanager, and neither was Eddie. If you employ people, it's their job to do their job. And I still practice that to this day. Matty's my team manager, Brad Wischusen's my chief race engineer. It's not my job to overrule them. Occasionally, I'll give them my opinion, but you employ the right people to do the job, and that's what Eddie did. He rarely got involved in anything. In fact, I think he actually got on the radio at Spa, the one you were just talking about, because Ralph wanted to have a crack. He wanted to get past Damon, and Eddie had to, I think it was the only time I ever heard him talk on the radio, had to intervene and basically lay down the law. So look, I suppose, I definitely learned that from Eddie, that, you employ the right people, let them do their jobs.
Tim, it's been awesome to learn about your life before supercars. Congratulations on everything that you've achieved.
Yeah, thank you. As I say, there's so much more I could talk about, and particularly the European aviation stories. They could go on for hours, but I thoroughly enjoyed my 17 years over there, and I didn't quite get out of motorsport, which was the plan when I came back to Australia, because now I've been here for probably almost 17 years as well. So, but yeah, it's good to tell the story.